She was told she would never be more than the girl with the limp. Every morning she strapped on her prosthetic leg, walked into a building full of people who laughed behind her back, and refused to let a single one of them see her break. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, the most feared man in Seoul walked through those doors unannounced, and everything changed. What he saw in 30 seconds would expose a company built on cruelty and turn a quiet intern into the woman who rewrote its rules. This is not a story about pity. This is a story about power, prejudice, and the price of underestimating someone who refuses to disappear. Stay until the end, because the final scene will stay with you long after the video ends. If stories like this move you, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Let's begin. The black car came to a stop outside KH Holdings Tower before the building even knew it was under attack. No press release. No warning email to the executive floor. No black-suited assistants rushing ahead to clear hallways and hide problems. Kwon Hae-jin stepped out of the vehicle alone, adjusted the cuff of his coat, and walked through the front doors of his own company like a man walking into enemy territory. The security guard at the front desk nearly dropped his coffee. "Chairman Kwon." "Don't announce me," Hae-jin said, already moving past him. "Not to anyone." The guard swallowed hard and reached for the phone anyway, because that was what you did when the most powerful man in the country's corporate underworld showed up without warning. Hae-jin turned his head just enough to catch the motion. "I said don't." The guard's hand froze midair. He set the phone back down. Hae-jin didn't need to raise his voice. He never did. People said the Kwon Hae-jin voice could empty a room without ever climbing above a whisper. Men who had crossed him in business, in politics, in the shadow economy that ran beneath every glittering tower in Gangnam, had learned that lesson permanently. He was not a man who repeated himself twice. He rode the elevator up to the 14th floor, the Operations and Logistics Division, one of 40 divisions inside the company, one he had not personally inspected in over 3 years. That was the point of today. Not to catch anyone off guard exactly, though he wouldn't mind if he did, but to remember what his company actually looked like when nobody was performing for him. He stepped out onto the 14th floor, and the air itself seemed to change. Conversations died mid-sentence. Chairs rolled back. Somewhere near the coffee station, a ceramic mug slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the floor, and nobody moved to clean it up because nobody could look away from the man walking calmly through the rows of desks. Hae-jin said nothing. He simply walked, hands folded behind his back, eyes moving across the floor the way a hawk's eyes move across a field, patient, unhurried, missing nothing. He noted the flickering light above the third row of desks. He noted the stack of unopened supply boxes blocking half of a walkway. He noted an employee visibly minimizing a browser window that had definitely not contained a spreadsheet. Then he saw her. She was near the far wall, beside a bank of filing cabinets, balancing a thick stack of documents against her hip. She wasn't young in the fragile sense people liked to imagine when they pictured a 22-year-old intern. She stood like someone twice her age who had already survived twice her share of difficulty. Her natural hair was pulled back in a low bun, sleeves rolled to the elbow, brow furrowed in concentration. And then, mid-step, she winced. It was subtle. Most people in that office wouldn't have caught it. But Hae-jin had spent his life reading rooms, reading faces, reading the half-second flicker before someone tried to hide pain, weakness, fear. He caught it instantly. The young woman shifted her weight, and for a moment her right leg, the one that ended just below the knee and continued in matte carbon fiber and silicone, buckled almost imperceptibly beneath her. The stack of documents wobbled in her arms. 3 employees near the printer noticed. They did not move to help her. They snickered. One of them, a man in his 30s with a company lanyard and an expression of practiced boredom, muttered something to his colleague. Hae-jin was too far to hear the words, but he didn't need to. He'd heard variations of that particular tone his entire life, the tone people used when they found someone's struggle entertaining instead of human. Mary Jane did not look toward them. She did not falter, did not call for help, did not so much as let her breathing change in a way anyone could detect. She planted one hand against the edge of a nearby desk, steadied herself, adjusted the socket of her prosthetic with a quick, practiced motion of her opposite hand, and bent to retrieve the two documents that had slipped from the stack and landed on the floor. She picked them up. She straightened her spine. She kept walking. Jean stood completely still. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the most feared man in the building had nothing to say. He watched her walk the remaining distance to a supervisor's office, knock twice, and step inside. Only then did he turn toward the nearest employee, a young analyst who had gone pale the moment Jean's eyes landed on him. "Who is that?" Jean asked. Not a demand. A quiet question, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. That's the new intern, sir. Mary Jane. She started 6 weeks ago. Whose team? Manager Bay's team, sir. Eulalia Bay. Jean said nothing else. He simply turned and walked toward the office Mary Jane had just entered, and the entire 14th floor seemed to hold its breath as one. Inside the small glass-walled office, Eulalia Bay sat behind her desk reviewing a report with visible irritation. "These numbers are wrong again," she said without looking up. "Redo the summary section." "I flagged that section in my notes," Mary Jane said evenly, setting the documents on the desk. "The discrepancy came from the vendor's file, not from my calculations. If you check page 4. "I don't have time to check page 4. Eulalia finally looked up, her expression flat with a kind of practiced condescension. "Just fix it. And try to be faster next time. I know things are harder for you, but we all have deadlines." Mary Jane's jaw tightened, almost invisibly. "I can meet the deadline. The report is accurate. I'd appreciate it if you actually reviewed the vendor discrepancy before. Is there a problem here?" Both women turned. Eulalia's face went through 3 visible stages of shock in under 2 seconds, confusion, recognition, and finally naked panic, as she registered exactly who was standing in her doorway. "Chairman Kwan," she stammered, rising so fast her chair rolled backward into the wall. We weren't informed of a visit today. I would have." "That was the intention," Jean said simply. His eyes moved to Mary Jane. She did not flinch, did not bow her head, did not perform the nervous deference that every other employee on the floor had displayed in the last 10 minutes. She simply met his gaze directly, the way one professional meets another, waiting to see what he wanted before deciding how to respond. He found that, more than anything else, interesting. "You're the new intern," he said. "Yes, sir." "Mary Jane, you dropped some documents on your way here." "I picked them back up," she said. Not defensive. Not apologetic. A simple statement of fact. Something flickered behind Jean's eyes, the faintest trace of something that might, on a different man, have been the beginning of a smile. "So you did," he said. He turned to Eulalia, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Manager Bay, I'll be reviewing the 14th floor's operations personally over the coming weeks. I trust you'll make yourself available." "Of course, Chairman." "Absolutely." Jean gave a single nod, glanced once more at Mary Jane, a glance that lasted perhaps 2 seconds longer than it should have, and left the office without another word. The moment he was gone, Eulalia exhaled sharply, sat back down, and shot Mary Jane a look sharpened by something close to hatred. "What did you say to him?" "Nothing," Mary Jane said. "He asked a question. I answered it." "Get back to your desk," Eulalia snapped. "And fix that report. Today." Mary Jane picked up the documents without another word and walked out, her spine straight, her steps even, betraying nothing of the ache that had settled deep into the muscle above her prosthetic. She had learned a long time ago that showing pain in a place like this was its own kind of currency, and she refused to spend it for anyone's entertainment. She had no idea that 4 floors above her, in an office overlooking the entire glittering sprawl of Seoul, Kwon Hae-jin was already picking up his phone and making a call that would upend the 14th floor completely. "Get me everything on the intern named Mary Jane," he told his assistant. Her file, her performance evaluations, her assignment history since she started. "And get me the accessibility compliance reports for every floor in this building. Tonight." "Yes, Chairman." "May I ask what prompted?" "No," Hae-jin said, and hung up. He stood at the window for a long time after that, looking down at the city he had spent 2 decades building an empire inside of, an empire of shipping routes and construction contracts and quiet arrangements made in back rooms. An empire feared by rivals and respected by allies, an empire that, until 11 minutes ago, he had believed was running exactly as it should. He thought of the way she had picked herself back up. No cry for help. No apology for existing in a body some people found inconvenient to look at. Just the quiet, absolute refusal to be stopped. He had built companies. He had broken men who thought themselves untouchable. He had walked into rooms that emptied at the sound of his name. But he could not remember the last time he had seen anyone show that particular kind of strength, the kind that didn't announce itself, didn't ask to be seen, and kept walking anyway. By midnight, a thick folder sat on his desk. He opened it and began to read. The first page was Mary Jane's original application. Graduated near the top of her class in industrial engineering. Strong recommendation letters. A section describing a car accident 4 years earlier that had resulted in the amputation of her right leg below the knee, followed, in her own words, included as part of a supplementary essay the internship program required. By 18 months of physical rehabilitation, a return to university a full semester ahead of her expected recovery timeline, and a closing sentence that made Hae-jin pause. "I did not lose my leg. I lost a version of the world that assumed I would stop." He read it twice. Then he turned to her performance file, and his expression, already grim, darkened further with every page. 6 weeks of assignments. Filing. Data entry far below her qualifications. Repetitive administrative tasks that any first-week hire could complete blindfolded. Not a single project assignment that touched the analytical or engineering work her degree and application had promised her. Attached to the file were 2 evaluation notes from Eulalia Bay. Intern shows adequate effort but limited capacity for complex tasks given physical limitations. Recommend continued placement in support-level duties. Hae-jin's hand tightened around the page until the paper creased. He turned to the accessibility compliance section next, the one he'd requested almost as an afterthought, and found something worse than he expected. On paper, the company's official policy manual described a comprehensive commitment to workplace accessibility, accessible restrooms on every floor, functioning elevators, adjustable workstations, clear emergency evacuation procedures for employees with mobility differences. The actual maintenance logs told a different story. 2 of the 4 elevators on the 14th floor had been out of service for over a month, both flagged for repair, neither repaired. The accessible restroom on that floor had been converted into a storage closet 8 months earlier and never converted back. There was no accessible emergency exit route on file for the East Wing at all, meaning, in the event of a fire, an employee like Mary Jane would have no documented way out. Hae-jin sat in the silence of his office for a long time, the city lights spread out beneath him like something indifferent and enormous, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. Not for Mary Jane. For himself. He had built an empire so large he had stopped seeing the people inside it. The next morning, Mary Jane arrived at 6:40, as she did every day, nearly 90 minutes before her official start time. It was a habit she'd built during her first year of rehabilitation, waking early, giving herself time to move through the world at her own pace instead of the world's, refusing to let anyone see her rush or stumble in front of a crowd. The office was empty except for the night cleaning crew finishing their rounds. She liked it that way. She could walk the length of the floor without an audience, get her coffee without commentary, and settle at her desk with the quiet dignity nobody in daylight ever seemed willing to grant her. She didn't notice Hae-jin standing near the elevator bank until she was halfway to her desk. She stopped. "Chairman Kwon, you're here early," he said. "I like the quiet." "So do I." He studied her for a moment. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request, not exactly, but it also wasn't the cold command she'd expect from a man of his reputation. She fell into step beside him, matching his slower than necessary pace, understanding without either of them saying it aloud that he had adjusted his stride for her. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 6 weeks and 2 days. "What have you been assigned so far?" She hesitated. This was the moment, she knew, where most people either complained bitterly or lied to protect themselves. She chose a third option. Filing. Data entry. Organizing archived vendor contracts by date. A pause. "None of it uses my degree. But I've done all of it well, and I've done all of it on time. Do you think that's a coincidence?" "The assignments you've received?" Mary Jane looked at him directly. It was the same look she'd given him the day before, unflinching, evaluating, refusing to perform gratitude for a question she hadn't been sure he'd actually ask. "No," she said. "I don't think it's a coincidence." "Why do you think it happens?" "Because Manager Bae looked at my leg before she looked at my resume." Mary Jane's voice didn't shake. It had long ago stopped shaking when she said things like this out loud. She decided what I could do before she gave me the chance to show her. And now she uses the work she assigned me, work that proves nothing, as evidence that I can't do more. Hae-jin absorbed that in silence for several steps. "And you haven't reported this?" "To who?" "Her supervisor is her friend. HR told me during orientation that internship complaints are, and I'm quoting, handled with discretion to protect working relationships. I've learned that means the person with less power loses. You could have told me yesterday. You're the chairman of the company, sir." Complaining to the most powerful man in the building on his first unscheduled visit doesn't sound like discretion. It sounds like career suicide. Something in Hae-jin's expression shifted, not quite amusement, but close to it, an emotion so unfamiliar to his face that a passing employee, had one been present, might not have recognized it at all. "You're not wrong," he admitted. They reached the end of the hallway. Mary Jane stopped in front of her desk, and Hae-jin stopped a respectful distance away. "I need an opportunity," Mary Jane said quietly, echoing the words she'd repeated to herself and to anyone who asked for months. "Not pity. Whatever you're about to offer me, if it's pity, I don't want it." Hae-jin studied her for a long moment. "I haven't offered you anything yet," he said. "When I do, you'll know the difference." He turned and walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone in the empty office with her pulse hammering in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the strange, unfamiliar sensation of being seen. Over the following 2 weeks, the 14th floor transformed in ways that rippled outward through the entire building. Maintenance crews arrived to repair both broken elevators within 4 days, a turnaround so fast that longtime employees joked darkly that the chairman himself must have personally threatened the elevator company. The storage closet that had once been an accessible restroom was cleared and restored within a week, its supplies relocated to a proper storage room down the hall. A team from facilities management walked every floor of the building with clipboards, documenting every violation of the accessibility standards that had, until now, existed only as decoration in a policy manual nobody read. Eulalia Bay grew increasingly agitated as the changes accumulated, though she was careful never to let her frustration show whenever Hae-jin was near. She redoubled her scrutiny of Mary Jane instead, finding new ways to critique work that required no critique, assigning new tasks beneath her skill level with a thin smile that dared Mary Jane to object. Mary Jane didn't object. She simply kept a private, careful record. Every assignment, every deadline, every instance of a qualified project going to a less experienced colleague, while she was handed something menial instead. She wasn't building a case out of bitterness. She was building it because some quiet, stubborn part of her, the same part that had gotten her out of a hospital bed and back into a university lecture hall a full semester ahead of schedule, refused to let this go unanswered forever. 3 weeks after Hae-jin's first unannounced visit, he returned to the 14th floor, this time with an actual appointment on Eulalia's calendar, though he arrived without ceremony regardless. He walked directly to Mary Jane's desk. "I have a project," he said, without preamble. "The East Wing distribution warehouse has been operating below capacity for 11 months. 3 consulting firms have reviewed the workflow and failed to identify a viable fix within budget. I want you to review it." The floor around them went silent. Several employees within earshot exchanged glances. "Sir," Eulalia interjected quickly, appearing at Hae-jin's shoulder as if she'd teleported there. "With respect, that project requires senior-level logistics experience. Perhaps one of the more established analysts." "I asked for her," Hae-jin said, without looking at Eulalia. "Not for a committee vote on whether she's capable." Eulalia's mouth closed. Hae-jin turned back to Mary Jane. "I don't care how long it takes. I don't care if you need to walk the warehouse floor 12 times or interview every worker on every shift. I want a solution grounded in data, not guesswork. Show me what you can do." Mary Jane felt something rise in her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. It took her a moment to recognize it, because it was an emotion she'd been denied so consistently over the past 6 weeks that it had started to feel foreign. "Trust. I'll need warehouse access," she said, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "Full shift logs, inventory turnover data for the past year, and permission to interview the floor staff directly instead of relying on supervisor reports." "Done," Hae-jin said. "Anything else?" A deadline that reflects the actual complexity of the problem. Not an arbitrary one designed to set me up to fail. For the first time since she'd met him, Hae-jin's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but its close relative. 6 weeks, he said. "Take 7 if you need it." He left without waiting for Eulalia's reaction, though Mary Jane didn't need to look at her supervisor to feel the heat of her fury radiating across the room. The following 6 weeks were, in many ways, the hardest and most alive Mary Jane had felt since the accident that took her leg. She spent her mornings in the East Wing warehouse, walking the concrete floor in worn sneakers that fit better over her prosthetic than the dress shoes the office required, mapping bottlenecks with a clipboard and a stopwatch. She spent her afternoons buried in spreadsheets, cross-referencing shift patterns against fulfillment delays, building models that no consulting firm had bothered to build because they'd never actually talked to the workers doing the labor. She talked to forklift operators who'd been complaining about the same routing inefficiency for 2 years without anyone listening. She talked to a night shift supervisor who'd developed an informal workaround that nobody in management had ever documented or scaled. She talked, more than anything, to the people the company's official reports had never bothered asking. By the 5th week, she had a solution. It wasn't glamorous. It was, in fact, embarrassingly simple once she laid it out, a restructured shift rotation combined with a revised loading dock sequence that eliminated nearly 40% of the delay currently baked into the warehouse's daily output. It required no new hires, no new equipment, no capital investment beyond a modest software licensing fee for a scheduling tool. It was the kind of fix that made everyone who saw it afterward wonder how nobody had found it sooner. She presented her findings to Eulalia first, as protocol required, 2 days before her scheduled presentation to Hae-jin. Eulalia read through the report in silence, her expression unreadable, and then set it down on her desk with a small, tight smile that made the hair on the back of Mary Jane's neck rise. "This is good work," Eulalia said. "Thank you. I'll take it from here for the final presentation." Mary Jane blinked. "I'm sorry. The chairman requested a solution. He'll get one. I'll present the findings to him myself. It's protocol for a manager to deliver final departmental reports to executive leadership." Eulalia's smile didn't waver. "You did good supporting work. I'll make sure that's reflected." Supporting work, Mary Jane repeated slowly. I designed the entire model. I conducted every interview. I built every projection in that report from raw data I collected myself. And I'm your supervisor, Eulalia said, her voice hardening beneath the pleasant surface. Which means the work you produce under my department is, functionally, my department's work. That's how it's always been done here. Mary Jane stood very still. For 6 weeks, she had absorbed every slight, every dismissive comment, every menial task disguised as an opportunity, and she had done it without complaint because she'd told herself the work would eventually speak for itself. She had been wrong. No, she said quietly. Eulalia's eyebrows lifted. Excuse me. I said no. This is my project. My data. My analysis. I'm presenting it myself. You don't have that authority. Then I'll ask the person who does. Mary Jane picked up her laptop, her notes, and the full report, every page, every appendix, every raw data file she'd painstakingly compiled, and walked out of Eulalia's office without waiting to be dismissed. She didn't go back to her desk. She went straight to the executive elevator, and for the first time in her life, pressed the button for the top floor without anyone's permission. The assistant outside Hei-jin's office looked up in alarm as Mary Jane approached, laptop bag over her shoulder, spine straight, jaw set. I'm sorry, do you have an appointment? No, Mary Jane said. But I need 5 minutes. The chairman is in a meeting, he can't be. The door opened before the assistant could finish the sentence. Hei-jin stood in the doorway, having apparently heard the exchange from inside. It's fine, he said. Let her in. Mary Jane stepped past the stunned assistant and into the office, and Hei-jin closed the door behind her. You look upset, he observed. I am upset. Mary Jane set her laptop bag down on the edge of his desk with more force than necessary. I finished the warehouse project. Ahead of deadline. It works. I tested every projection against 3 separate datasets and the model holds. And this morning, Manager Bay informed me that she'll be the one presenting it to you, because apparently, in this department, whatever an intern builds automatically becomes her supervisor's property. Hei-jin's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very cold. Show me, he said. Mary Jane opened her laptop and pulled up the report, walking him through it with the same clarity and confidence she'd used on the warehouse floor. The shift restructuring, the loading dock sequence, the projected efficiency gains. The interviews with staff whose insight had never once made it into an official report before hers. Hei-jin listened without interrupting, occasionally asking a sharp, pointed question that she answered without hesitation, his respect for her deepening with every response. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. This is exceptional work, he finally said. I know, Mary Jane replied, and there was no arrogance in it, only the flat certainty of someone who had earned the right to say so. And Manager Bay intended to present this as her own. Yes. Hei-jin leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that would have unsettled most people. Mary Jane held his gaze without flinching, the same way she had on the very first day he'd noticed her. You could have let her, he said. It would have been easier. Less risk to your position. I could have, Mary Jane agreed. But I didn't lose my leg fighting to survive and rebuild my entire life from a hospital bed just so I could watch someone else take credit for my mind. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with something neither of them had a name for yet. How many other employees have been treated the way you were? Hei-jin finally asked. Mary Jane blinked, caught off guard by the direction of the question. I don't know, sir. I can only speak to my own experience. I wasn't asking you to guess, Hei-jin said, almost to himself. I was asking myself. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city in the same way he had the night he'd first read her file. I built this company from nothing, he said, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. I know every contract, every acquisition, every deal that made it what it is. And somehow I never asked how it actually treated the people inside it. With respect, sir, Mary Jane said carefully, most people at the top never do. It's easier not to look. Hae-jin turned back to face her. I'm looking now. He walked to his desk, picked up his phone, and made a call that Mary Jane would later learn set an entire internal investigation into motion within the hour. I want a full confidential audit, he told whoever answered. Every department. Every manager's promotion decisions for the last 3 years. Every internship evaluation. Every discrimination complaint that was ever filed and buried under discretion. I want it cross-referenced against actual performance data, not supervisor opinion. A pause. Yes. Starting tonight. He hung up and looked at Mary Jane. You'll present your project to the full executive board next week, he said. Yourself. Not Manager Bae. Mary Jane's breath caught. Sir, You earned it, he said simply. I don't reward people for having a difficult life. I reward people for exceptional work. Yours happens to be exceptional. He paused. The fact that Manager Bae tried to steal it only confirms what I already suspected about her judgment. Mary Jane left his office that afternoon feeling something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in longer than she could remember. Not gratitude, not relief, but the clean, uncomplicated satisfaction of being recognized for exactly what she'd built with her own 2 hands. She had no idea it was only the beginning. The confidential audit Hae-jin launched that night took 11 days to complete, and what it uncovered was worse than even he had feared. Eulalia Bae's history of taking credit for subordinates' work extended back nearly 4 years, predating Mary Jane by a wide margin. 3 previous interns, 2 of them foreign nationals who had since left the company entirely, had filed complaints that were quietly closed under the same discretion policy Mary Jane had described. But it went further than one manager. The audit revealed a pattern stretching across nearly a dozen departments. A senior engineer in his late 50s passed over for promotion 4 separate times in favor of younger candidates with objectively weaker performance records, his age referenced obliquely but unmistakably in internal notes questioning his long-term fit. A finance analyst originally from the Philippines who had endured years of comments about her accent in meeting minutes that somehow always found their way into her performance reviews as communication concerns. 2 other interns with disabilities, one with partial hearing loss, another who used a mobility aid after a spinal injury, both funneled into low visibility, low growth assignments within their first month. Both quietly pushed out before their internships concluded. The company that appeared, from every press release and annual report, to be a beacon of modern corporate excellence was, underneath its glass and steel, running on the same quiet cruelty that existed in 100 other companies that had simply never been caught. Hae-jin read every page of the final report alone, late into the night, in the same office where Mary Jane had stood her ground 2 weeks earlier. He thought of every deal he'd closed in the past 3 years, every quarterly earnings call where he'd praised the culture his executives claimed to have built, every moment he had trusted the polished summary instead of walking the floor himself. He thought of the senior engineer who'd been passed over 4 times. He thought of the interns who'd left without ever being given a real chance to prove what they could do. He thought of Mary Jane, steadying herself against a desk, refusing to let anyone see her fall. By morning, he had made his decision. He called an emergency meeting of the entire executive leadership team, every division head, every senior manager, every person whose decisions had shaped the culture the audit had just exposed. He gave them exactly 1 hour of notice. They gathered in the largest conference room on the top floor, murmuring nervously among themselves, unaware of what was about to happen. Hae-jin walked in without a folder, without notes, without the polished corporate language his executives were accustomed to hearing from him. 11 days ago, he said, I ordered a confidential audit of every promotion decision, every internship evaluation, and every discrimination complaint filed in this company over the last 3 years. The room went silent. I did this because I watched an intern in this company get treated like she was invisible, despite doing work that outperformed employees who have been here for a decade. I did this because when I asked myself how many other people had been treated the same way, I realized I genuinely did not know the answer. He looked slowly around the table, meeting the eyes of every executive present, watching several of them shift uncomfortably in their seats. Now I know, he said. And the answer is unacceptable. He proceeded to lay out, without naming individuals in the open meeting, the full scope of what the audit had found, the buried complaints, the stolen credit, the promotions denied on the basis of age and accent and disability rather than performance, the accessibility policies that existed only on paper while elevators sat broken for months and emergency exits went undocumented. This ends today, Heijin said. Not with a memo nobody reads. Not with a training video nobody watches. With structural change that I will personally oversee. He outlined it point by point, his voice steady, his authority absolute. Transparent promotion standards, published company-wide, evaluated against documented performance metrics rather than supervisor discretion alone. A fully accessible facility audit across every building the company owned, with binding repair deadlines and personal accountability for any manager who allowed accessibility violations to persist. An anonymous complaint system routed directly to an independent oversight committee, bypassing the department structures that had allowed complaints to be buried for years. Equal internship evaluation standards, reviewed by a panel rather than a single supervisor, with every intern's actual work product examined directly rather than filtered through a manager's summary. Mandatory disability accommodations built into every facility's baseline design, not treated as an optional expense. Anti-discrimination training that was actually enforced, with consequences attached to violations rather than a checkbox exercise. Independent employee reviews conducted by a rotating panel outside an employee's direct chain of command. And, above all, merit-based promotions, evaluated on documented output rather than the subjective impressions of managers who had, as the audit proved beyond doubt, allowed personal bias to distort their judgment for years. Every manager in this room, Heijin continued, will be held personally accountable, starting immediately, for how their decisions align with these standards. Anyone found to have falsified an evaluation, buried a complaint, or claimed credit for a subordinate's work will be terminated. This is not a warning. This is the new baseline. Nobody in the room spoke. Nobody dared. Eulalia Bay, seated near the back of the conference room, had gone the color of old paper. Heijin's eyes found hers and held. Manager Bay, he said, his voice quiet but unmistakably final, you're relieved of your position, effective today. HR will finalize the details. Chairman, her voice cracked. I've been with this company for 9 years. 9 years during which you buried 3 complaints from interns before this one, denied opportunities to employees you deemed unworthy based on nothing but your own prejudice, and attempted to steal credit for a project that saved this company millions of won in projected losses. Heijin's voice never rose. It didn't need to. 9 years is not a defense. It's an indictment. Eulalia said nothing else. She simply gathered her things in silence, under the weight of every eye in the room, and walked out. Nobody moved to comfort her. Heijin watched the door close behind her, then turned back to the remaining executives, whose faces had shifted from discomfort to something closer to genuine fear. I built this company to compete with anyone in this country, he said. I did not build it to be a place where people are punished for the body they were born into, or the accident that reshaped it, or the accent they carry, or the years they've lived. If any of you cannot operate under those terms, I suggest you find a company that shares your values, because this one no longer does. He left the meeting exactly as he'd entered it, without ceremony, without raised voice, with the absolute, immovable authority of a man who had just rebuilt the foundation of everything he owned in the span of a single conversation. News of what happened in that conference room spread through the building within the hour, whispered from floor to floor with the kind of electric disbelief usually reserved for scandal, not justice. Mary Jane heard the details secondhand from a coworker who practically ran to her desk to deliver them. She's gone, the coworker said, breathless. Manager Bay. He fired her. In front of everyone. Mary Jane sat very still for a moment, absorbing it. She had expected consequences, maybe a quiet transfer, maybe a formal warning buried in a file somewhere. She had not expected this. She thought of every dismissive comment, every menial task disguised as opportunity, every whispered laugh near the printer when her leg had buckled beneath her. She felt something complicated settle in her chest, not triumph exactly, and not quite relief either. Something closer to the exhausted, aching satisfaction of finally being believed. 2 days later, Mary Jane presented her warehouse efficiency project to the full executive board. She stood at the front of the largest conference room in the building, the same one where Jean had dismantled a manager's career 48 hours earlier and delivered her findings with a steadiness that surprised even her. She walked them through the data. The interviews. The projected savings, nearly 200 million won annually once fully implemented, a figure that made several board members sit up straighter in their chairs. She fielded questions from executives who had spent decades in logistics without ever once talking to the people operating the loading docks, and answered every single one without hesitation. When she finished, there was a beat of silence and then applause, not polite, obligatory applause, but the real kind, the kind that surprised the people making it. Jean, seated at the head of the table, said nothing during the presentation itself. He simply watched, arms crossed, expression unreadable to everyone except perhaps Mary Jane, who had learned by now that his stillness meant something entirely different from indifference. After the meeting, as the room emptied, he approached her. "Well done," he said. "Thank you," Mary Jane replied. Then, after a beat, "Was that a test? All of it? Was I meant to fail so you could see how I handled it?" Jean's expression flickered with something almost like offense. "No," he said. "I don't test people by letting them be exploited. I gave you a genuine problem because I trusted you could solve it. Everything else that happened, Manager Bay, the audit, all of it, that wasn't a test. That was me finally seeing what was already there." Mary Jane studied him for a long moment, trying to decide whether she believed him. What she found in his expression was not the practiced sincerity of a powerful man managing an underling's feelings. It was something rawer than that, something closer to genuine reckoning. "Okay," she said quietly. "I believe you." Weeks passed. The internal changes Jean had announced began taking visible shape throughout the company. Elevators were repaired company-wide within a month, ahead of the deadlines he'd set. Accessible restrooms were audited and restored on every floor. The anonymous complaint system launched with a level of transparency that stunned longtime employees who had grown cynical about the company's willingness to change. The senior engineer who'd been passed over 4 times was quietly promoted, his new title accompanied by a formal, if understated, acknowledgement that his previous evaluations had failed to reflect his actual contributions. The finance analyst whose accent had been weaponized against her in performance reviews received a formal apology and a transfer to a team where her manager had a documented history of fair evaluation. None of it happened perfectly. Change inside a company as large as Jean's never did. There were managers who resisted quietly, employees who grumbled that standards had gotten too soft, old habits that resurfaced in smaller, harder-to-prove ways that the new oversight committee had to chase down one complaint at a time. But it happened. Visibly. Consistently. And for the first time in longer than most employees could remember, the company's official values and its actual daily culture began, slowly, to resemble each other. Mary Jane, meanwhile, found herself with real work for the first time since she'd started cross-departmental logistics projects, a seat on the internship evaluation panel that had replaced the old single supervisor model. Invitations to meetings she would never have been permitted near 2 months earlier. She and Jean crossed paths often during this period, though never in the way office gossip liked to imagine. There was no dramatic romance unfolding in stolen glances across conference rooms, no secret dinners, none of the tabloid fantasy that a few bored employees whispered about near the coffee station. What existed between them was quieter than that, and in some ways more complicated. Mary Jane remained wary of him in ways she couldn't entirely explain, even to herself. It wasn't fear anymore, that had faded weeks ago, but something closer to guardedness, the same instinct that had protected her through years of people deciding what she could and couldn't do before she'd said a word. "You keep watching me like you're waiting for me to ask for something I shouldn't have," Jean observed one afternoon, catching her in the hallway outside a meeting. "I'm waiting to see if the changes last," Mary Jane said honestly. "Companies do this after a scandal all the time. Big announcements, then 6 months later everything quietly goes back to normal once nobody's watching." "I'm watching," Jean said. "I intend to keep watching." "For how long?" "For as long as it takes to make sure this isn't just about you," he said, "or about me feeling guilty for what I didn't see. It has to outlast both of us or it isn't real." Mary Jane considered that for a moment, and something in her posture eased, just slightly. "That's a good answer," she admitted. "I have a habit of giving those," Jean said, and this time, the almost smile made it fully to his face. Their conversations continued in fragments like that over the following months, brief, direct, entirely without the performance most people around Jean defaulted to. Mary Jane never flattered him, never softened her opinions to protect his ego, never treated his reputation as a reason to agree with something she disagreed with. It fascinated him in a way he didn't entirely understand at first, and eventually stopped trying to explain away. He had spent 2 decades surrounded by people who feared him, respected him, or wanted something from him, sometimes all three at once. Mary Jane wanted none of those things. She wanted the work. She wanted to be judged on what she built, not on the body she built it with, and she wanted absolutely nothing handed to her that she hadn't earned through her own effort. It was, he realized one evening while reviewing her latest project report alone in his office, the single most refreshing thing that had happened to him in years. For months after the warehouse presentation, Jean called a full company meeting, the largest gathering the organization had held since its last shareholder event, employees from every division filling the main auditorium on the ground floor. Mary Jane sat near the middle of the crowd, expecting nothing more than a standard quarterly update, perhaps a summary of the accessibility initiative's progress. She had no idea her name was about to be spoken in front of every employee in the building. Jean took the stage without notes, as he always did, and spent the first several minutes reviewing the structural changes implemented over the past 4 months, repaired facilities, the new complaint system, updated promotion standards, the departure of several managers whose conduct had been found in violation of the new policy, the quiet reinstatement of 2 former employees who had left the company under circumstances the audit later proved unjust. Then his tone shifted. "For months ago," he said, "I walked onto the 14th floor of this building unannounced, and I watched an intern struggle to adjust a prosthetic leg while carrying a stack of documents. I watched several employees notice her difficulty and laugh instead of helping." A murmur ran through the auditorium. Mary Jane felt her stomach drop, understanding suddenly where this was going. "That moment revealed something I should have known already," Jean continued. "That the culture of this company had drifted very far from what I believed I had built. I've spent the last 4 months trying to correct that, and I want to be clear that the work is not finished. It will never truly be finished. Culture requires constant maintenance, not a single announcement." He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes found her. "But I also want to announce something today that I believe matters. This company is launching a permanent accessibility and equal opportunity division, not a symbolic committee, but a fully funded department with real authority to audit facilities, review promotion decisions, and enforce the standards I outlined 4 months ago across every branch of this company, indefinitely." He let that settle before continuing. "And I'm asking Mary Jane to become its founding project consultant." the youngest person to hold that title in this company's history. The auditorium erupted into applause, employees turning to find her in the crowd, several reaching out to touch her shoulder in stunned congratulation. Mary Jane sat frozen, her pulse hammering, 100 emotions colliding at once. She stood slowly when the applause allowed it, and made her way to the front, every step deliberate, every step her own. She reached the stage and stood beside Jean, facing an auditorium full of people who, for months ago, had either laughed at her or looked away. "Say something," Jean said quietly, stepping back to give her the space. Mary Jane looked out at the crowd, found her voice, and let it carry. "If you're offering me this because you feel sorry for me," she said, turning to Jean, loud enough for the microphone to catch every word, "I don't want it." The auditorium went dead silent. Jean didn't hesitate. "I'm offering it because you proved you deserve it," he said. "Every project, every report, every time you refuse to let anyone else take credit for your work. This isn't pity. This is the standard I should have been holding this entire company to from the beginning." Something inside Mary Jane, some wall she had built brick by brick since the day she woke up in a hospital bed missing part of her leg, cracked open completely. She had spent years bracing for the world to see her as broken. She had spent months in this building specifically bracing for someone powerful to offer her something out of guilt instead of respect, because that had happened to her before, in smaller ways, in other places, and she had learned to distrust the difference. But standing on that stage, in front of an auditorium that had gone completely silent waiting for her answer, she finally let herself believe there was a difference, and that this was it. "Okay," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I accept." The applause that followed shook the room. 1 year passed. Mary Jane was no longer an intern. She held an office on the 11th floor now, not the largest in the building, but entirely her own, with a nameplate on the door that reads simply Mary Jane, Accessibility and Equal Opportunity Division. Under her leadership, the division had expanded to include a formal mentorship program for employees with disabilities, a fully overhauled facilities standard applied to every building the company owned across the country, and an internship evaluation system that other companies in the industry had begun quietly studying and, in a few cases, copying. She had become, without ever asking for the title, one of the most respected young employees in the entire organization. The company held its annual welcome event for new interns on a bright afternoon in early autumn, held in the same auditorium where Jean had once announced her new role in front of the entire staff. Mary Jane stood near the refreshment tables, half listening to a conversation between two department heads, when a young woman approached her, visibly nervous, a cane in her hand and an ID badge that marked her as one of this year's incoming interns. "Excuse me," the young woman said. "You're Mary Jane, right? From the Equal Opportunity Division." "That's me," Mary Jane said, offering a warm smile. The young woman hesitated, glancing down at her own hands before finding the courage to continue. "Do you think someone like me can really succeed here?" Mary Jane felt the question land somewhere deep, somewhere that remembered exactly what it felt like to stand in a place like this and wonder if the answer would be honest or just polite. She looked down for a moment at her own leg, at the prosthetic hidden beneath tailored pants that fit her exactly the way she wanted them to, chosen and worn with the same quiet confidence she'd built over years of refusing to apologize for existing the way she did. Then she smiled. "I used to ask myself the same question," she said. She looked across the room to where Jean stood near the entrance, engaged in conversation with a group of executives, his posture as commanding as it had been the very first day she'd seen him walk unannounced onto the 14th floor. He glanced up at that exact moment, as though he'd felt her attention find him, and their eyes met across the crowded room. "Then someone finally gave me a fair chance," Mary Jane said, turning back to the young intern. "And now it's my job to make sure the same thing happens for you." The young woman's shoulders eased, some of the tension leaving her posture for the first time since she'd walked into the building that morning. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet, Mary Jane said, smiling. Come find me in a year. Tell me what you built. Across the room, Heijin excused himself from the executives and made his way over, his expression unreadable to most people in the building, but perfectly clear to Mary Jane by now. He didn't smile often. People who worked under him for years counted the instances on one hand. But standing there, watching Mary Jane pass forward everything that had once been denied her, he smiled. You did that, he said quietly, once he reached her side, watching the young intern walk away toward the crowd with a lighter step than she'd arrived with. We did that, Mary Jane corrected. You gave the order. I did the work. That's how this is supposed to go, remember? I remember, Heijin said. Later that evening, after the event wound down and the auditorium emptied, Mary Jane walked toward the building's newly renovated main entrance. Wide glass doors, gentle ramps replacing the old uneven steps. Sensors that opened automatically for anyone who needed them, a design that had once existed only on paper in a policy manual nobody enforced. She walked through those doors the same way she walked through every door now. Not because someone carried her there. Not because anyone lowered a standard to let her through. But because she had earned, through every early morning and every late evening, every stolen project reclaimed and every menial task completed without complaint, the right to walk through them entirely on her own. Behind her, the tower rose into the darkening sky, its glass front reflecting the last orange light of the setting sun, its foundation, invisible to anyone glancing up from the street, finally, permanently changed. A person's disability may change the way they move through the world. It should never determine how far they are allowed to go. If this story moved you, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more stories like this one, and leave a comment telling us which moment hit you the hardest. Share it with someone who needs to hear that a fair chance changes everything. See you in the next story.